Hi, I'm Jennifer Troyer, Dean of the Belk College of Business at UNC Charlotte. Welcome to our second Dean's Leadership Series event. This lunchtime virtual series is a part of our year-long 50th anniversary celebration for the Belk College. The goal of the series is to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the college while giving back to the Charlotte community by welcoming distinguished panels of thought leaders who will share their insights and their experiences regarding current challenges and future opportunities facing our business community. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is changing the way everyday business is conducted. To better understand the current landscape and the future of commercial real estate, we are pleased to welcome three distinguished industry leaders. So let me introduce you to our distinguished panel of experts. First, I want to introduce you to Peter Fioretti. Peter is the founder and CEO of Mountain Funding. He also leads the Fioretti Family Foundation. Over his career, he has owned and managed several successful real estate investment companies, investing over $3 billion in equity. I should also say that thanks to Peter's vision and financial support, we were able to establish within our college the Student Managed Real Estate Investment Fund. So this investment fund provides students the opportunity to actively participate in real private real estate deals and to manage a real portfolio of real estate investments with guidance from members of the business community who are experts in the area of real estate. So Peter, welcome to the Dean's Leadership Series. Now, please welcome Jane Wu. Jane is an investor and real estate developer with 15 years of experience in finance and real estate development industries. She's a Belk College alumnus, earning her Master of Science in Mathematical Finance. She is also this year's Belk College Outstanding Young Alumni honoree. She founded Panorama Holdings and serves as the president. The company specializes in real estate real estate development, investment, finance, consultation, and EB5 projects. Welcome, Jane. I also want to introduce you to Landon Wyatt. Landon is a founding partner of Childress Klein. He brings nearly 4 decades of experience in the commercial real estate industry. Childress Klein has developed over 20 million square feet of industrial space throughout the Southeast, in addition to managing and leasing another 10 million square feet. Landon serves as co-chair of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance and is chair of our Childress Klein Center for Real Estate Advisory Board in the Belk College. Welcome, Landon. Finally, I also want to introduce you to my colleague in the Belk College, Yongqiang. Dr. Chu recently became the director of the Childress Klein Center for Real Estate. He is also the Childress Klein Distinguished Professor of Real Estate and Urban Economics and a Professor of Finance in the Belk College of Business at UNC Charlotte.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm happy to be here today for this very important conversation. So I'll start with a few questions for each of the panelists. A little later, we will also take your questions, and please submit your question for us via chat. So let me start first question by asking, how is the pandemic impacting the commercial real estate world? Landon, I will start with you. Could you give us a broad overview of the industrial, office, and retail sectors?
Certainly. I'm going to talk a little bit about industrial and retail and office as well. I think Jane is going to pick up more on the office front when she gets to that. And thinking about how this pandemic has affected the commercial real estate market, and really thinking in terms of what it was like at the outset, what it has settled into, and then I suppose it will later get into what the future may hold for it. And as I thought about my proxy was, how did our tenants behave initially in terms of communication, rent payment, occupancy, space usage, and what has transpired over the subsequent 7 months. Starting off with our industrial portfolio, which is basically in the Southeast. everyone thinks industrial has been the big winner from this pandemic, and that's probably largely true, but it's also ignoring that there are a lot of industrial businesses out there who serve industries that have been really depressed, serve the retail industry, serve hospitality, serve restaurants. And so you have to take with a grain of salt when you hear e-commerce is saving all industrial real estate. It's saving a lot of industrial real estate, but it's not all that. In the first probably 4 to 6 weeks, we heard from about 22% of our portfolio. We've got about 10 million square feet across the Southeast that we own. 22% reached out and said, hey, we need to talk about our rent. We're not sure how long this is going to last, what we're going to do. And that's when we really took our lessons from the 2008 downturn, where a similar thing happened related to housing, and reinstituted what I'll call our banker credit process. That is, if you need to talk about your rent, then we need to look at your financials, your balance sheet, income statement, how's it affecting you, what are the plans you're making. That process weeds out a lot of the companies who are asking because it's a reasonable time to ask. And at the end of that, we ended up exercising deferrals on about 7% of our portfolio. The typical deferral was probably 3 months, or in some cases 6 months of half rent, much of which was to be paid back the balance of 2020 or over the course of 2021. And from a payment standpoint, I'd say our collections probably initially in April and May dropped to 87, 88%, but frankly by June or July, we're back up to 98% plus. In terms of occupancy of the space, a little difficult to tell in some cases, but we think that initially in March, April, maybe 30% of our portfolio was actually in their space operating, but that quickly by June was probably back over to 95%, because if you think about what goes on in the industrial space, typically 5 to 10% of that space may be dedicated to office functions, administrative functions, which can be done remotely, but 90 to 95% of the space, the physical space, is because there is a physical product, a physical process, or both, none of which can be done remotely or virtually. So a lot of those businesses were back up and running very quickly. And I'd say at this point in time, our industrial business is operating as if it were January of last year. Retail, on the other hand, has been the poster child for absolute disaster. With the exception of grocery, drug, and hardware, virtually every one of our retail tenants, or every retail tenant, frankly, in the country, was forced to shut down for at least 60 days. And in some cases, that simply accelerated what I'd call the Amazon effect of businesses that were struggling to compete in an e-commerce world, and probably accelerated their downfall. But probably in more cases, you had small businesses that didn't have the balance sheet to sustain a 60-day shutdown, didn't have that kind of cash on hand. I'd say, when you also think back, there have been a number of large bankruptcies, JCPenney, Neiman, Ann Taylor, to name a few, that we believe that there are 10,000 store closures in the United States due to this, which is going to equate to probably 130 million square feet of vacant retail space that's going to be coming online. I'd say that's putting a downward pressure on rents of maybe 20%, but some of that's been made up for by the grocery, which is probably up 25%. Initially, probably 80% of our tenants, 80% of the number of our tenants sought rent relief. That's probably 50% of the rent roll when you account for the larger grocery, drug, and hardware. And collections probably fell to 50% of rent. That's back up to probably 75%. I think 95% of our tenant base is operating. having said that, those deferral agreements, which we executed with that probably half of our rent roll, are potentially ticking time bombs, that most of which were to be paid back in 2021. And there's certainly a really true question as to whether that actually is going to happen. Finally, I'll touch on our office experience briefly. It's behaved very, very differently from the other two products. We receive calls from maybe less than 5% of our tenant portfolio base asking about rent. And of those calls, less than 1% turned into any kind of deferral agreement. In a lot of cases, those were small service retail tenants in an office environment. So collections have stayed strong. Physical occupancy is another matter. We estimate that our office portfolio, which is about 11 million square feet, is less than 10% physically occupied at this point. And there aren't any signs that that is going to change anytime soon. To give an example, where my office is, in One Wells Fargo, it's a 1 million square foot building that would typically have a daily population on a year ago of between 4,000 and 5,000 people. I'd say the average daily occupancy right now is between 50 and 75 people. So it's well down, and along with that, demand for office space is at this point pretty frozen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thanks, Landon. Peter, it's your turn to talk about the multifamily sector.
Got it. Well, multifamily has been relatively resilient, compared to other product types like retail and hospitality, but certainly has not been immune to this pandemic. So at first, what happened, let's say March through May, operations really focused on making sure tenants and employees not only safe, but felt safe. Signage and communication were very important. One really good thing that came out of the early stages of this is that this forced our property managers to really have much more direct interaction with our tenants, much more hands-on, which as a owner, investor, that makes you feel a lot better. They had to pay attention to the tenants because of rent collections, right? Weren't many move-outs, but folks didn't pay, or some folks didn't pay. And so our property managers had to really interact with our tenants much more directly and understand their situation. So focused on healthy environment, safe environment, communication, and more interaction. Then as time went on, we did have both a drop in occupancy. Tenants just moved out because they lost their job, for example. And some tenants moved out because they bought a home, which is interesting. And we also saw a drop in rent collections as well in the beginning. As we worked with our tenants, those rent collections improved dramatically over a short period of time. And so that was an interesting dilemma. From a deal perspective, starting mid-March, we saw a incredible slowdown of deal flow, buying and selling assets. Why? Uncertainty. And two, capital dried up. Not only equity, but debt just froze. That has since come back. So now that we know where we are, now we see in Q4 a pipeline of either selling assets or buying assets. In multifamily, we haven't seen much distress yet, but we do expect to see some distress opportunities starting in the beginning of 2021. Why? Well, there are going to be some weaker owners that are just not going to be able to sustain this pandemic, right? And banks are going to be less willing to work with them if they're not a strong operator. So we hope to see an increase in activity both on the buy side and the sell side in Q4, and then ramping up even more so in 2021. One more thing, I think there's, this pandemic has really separated the operators who are excellent at what they do, who move quickly with decisions, who focus on what's important, who become innovative, versus those who are sort of, I'd say, normal and maybe somewhat complacent or even lazy. And you can see a huge difference in performers at all levels because of that. We've replaced some property managers on some of our properties because of that, and brought in others who are just more aggressive and innovative and focused. And so I think you'll see better performers at all levels, contractors, managers, asset managers, owners, who perform well will end up exceeding in this marketplace.
Thank you, Peter. Next, let's turn to Jane. Could you tell us a little bit more about the hotel and also the office space?
All right. Okay. First, thanks everyone who is joining us online today. And I'm Jane Wu. It's my pleasure to be here with everyone. So for hotel business, the impact has been devastating. The COVID-19's full impact on the hotel industry took hold in April with a 70% drop in demand, before it rebounded slightly to close second quarter with down to 60%. And the ADR dropped by 37.4%, and the occupancy dropped about 60%, which led about 75% drop in RevPAR. And for some luxury hotel, that number is as high as 90% drop. So it's crazy. And so the hotel is continuing to be affected by the reduced economic activities, the social distancing, and the reduced travels. So to put it in perspective, TSA checkpoints passenger dropped 89% in Q2. And that has severely impacted on hotel demand. Foreign travelers expanding in US was down by 98%, which is the year-over-year number, have a huge impact on the hotel demand to the US gateway cities. So the almost completely stop of the corporate travel and the group events has led to unprecedented declines in revenue, to a point majority of the hotel owners will not be able to meet their loan obligations. Banks has been willing to help, but most of the forbearance will be expired or will be ended before the market recovery. So this will lead many distressed sales and or foreclosures, very unfortunately. So major cities have suffered the most. Like New York has seen over 100 hotels closed permanently. So for the hotel business, this pandemic had a huge impact, and it's just devastating to see what's going on right now. And for the office sector, Landon shared a lot of great insight, so I will be a little bit short on that. But so the office sector, the demand has dropped by 44% year over year as well. And then we have a national negative net absorption of about 21.5 million square foot, which is about at par compared with Q2 2009, which was like a 21.2 million square foot. And most of those negative net absorption mostly were in California, Texas, and New York metro area. The only place where the majority markets recorded positive absorptions in Q2 were in the Southeast market. Charlotte ranked number 3 on positive absorption, both in the square footage, which is about 180,000 square foot, and also in the absorption rate, which is about 0.4% increase. So Charlotte entered 2020 with a very healthy office market. We had a very little sublease activities, and REIT were rising across virtually all markets, all submarkets. And the corporates were migrating to the best located properties with the best amenities. So the landlord has who were improving the aging but well-located property were rewarded with higher rents. And also those new product in South End, downtown, in South Park, Ballantyne are all made those organic and inbounded demand. And so when we entered this pandemic, Charlotte was doing very well. But today, with what's going on right now, everything seems to be put into a wait and see lens. So do landlord attempt to overhaul their building to accommodate the health guidance, or do the tenant reconfigure the office to spread workers out, or do the corporate at the work from home model, and do the work from home and the spread out balance out? So all of those, we don't have a clear answer yet. So everything has been put into a wait and see. So those tenant has a lease expiration coming up, simply are pushing their renewal to another 6 to 18 months. And landlord has agreed because they wanted to leave to fight for another day. And but I would say that majority of the corporations has experienced the work from home model and find it has diminished return over time. For a few weeks, it seems novel, and Zoom calls feels like in the range. After a couple of months, the feeling is not the same. Employers report that the workforce is detached from their culture, and productivities are suffering. And it's just like a student with a snow day. Remote is good for one-off, but as a norm, it's very damaging. So also, we see landlords has been actively safeguarded their buildings with additional sanitation, reducing group interactions, enhancing outside air intake, etc. This is great and helpful. But in Charlotte, just like Landon said, the physical occupancy would not be there. And until the big 5 in Charlotte, including BOA, Wells, Duke, LI, and Truist, return to work, the CBD is just to feel out of season, and it will feel to others like they shouldn't be there neither. Yeah, so.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much for all of you sharing very important insights. So I'll ask my second question, which is kind of obviously closely related to what you have described about the current situation. The question is, how will commercial real estate kind of emerge from the pandemic? And Peter, do you want to start first?
Okay, yes. I think in general, commercial real estate is going to emerge just fine in this pandemic. Like I said before, I think the excellent performers are going to respond well to the marketplace. So it's going to be led by focus and innovation based on tenant behavior. That's in all product classes, particularly with multifamily. Tenant behavior. A flee to the suburbs, less dense product, accommodating tenants working from home. Different space use, just not in a unit, but in common areas. Better technology available, right? Better services where social distancing can work. Like, you think about it, pool areas, barbecue areas, clubhouses, etc. Right? So it's going to start with that. In addition, from a capital standpoint, I think you see two major shifts. One, the underwriting is going to be much more conservative, assuming zero rent growth for a period of time, more incentives for a period of time, and more reserves for preparing for, another uptick in whether it be COVID or some other related situation. The second thing from a capital standpoint is there's going to be more equity needed on a per deal basis. Lenders have become more conservative and will remain so. They're going to require higher reserves. So that's going to require more equity. The good news is with more conservative debt, it's going to be less expensive debt. Interest rates have come down, and with lower leverage, there'll be more attractive debt available. I also think there's going to be a big focus on innovation from a property management standpoint. Hands-on property management has to change. Complacency is going to lose out to assertive, focused property management. And those who think property management seems to be sometimes a boring part of the industry, I think that's going to be such an important part of success versus not going forward.
Thank you, Peter. Jen, do you want to
Okay.
tell us how you kind of prepared or your view on how the commercial real estate market will emerge from the pandemic?
Yeah, I would say so the overall market is definitely, I think it's taking a body blow. And of course, multifamily is one of those best performed assets, just like Peter said. And for the office space, there are, new features will surely be added to the mid and high-rise product, just like security was added to the buildings after 9/11. The technology will be enhanced to allow for productive work from home when needed. Office demand will eventually return, but just as mentioned, it's still the demand is absent today. So short term, I would expect a unique single-story adaptive reused product to be in vogue. And I would think controlling HVAC, outdoor airs, and maybe no elevators or private entrance, etc., would be very attractive. But those are just for short term. As we mentioned, for long term, it's still wait and see. So for the hotel space, hotel sector will not begin its path to full recovery until there is a widely distributed and trusted vaccine. It's just the reality. And hotel has been implemented their protocols to, enhance sanitation, all of that. But without the vaccine and without the travel back to normal, it's still a very challenging environment. We anticipated the vaccine probably, hopefully, will be happen next year, the first half of 2021, and then the second half we should see a recovery that will likely last at least 2 years for before the revenue returns to the pre-COVID level.
Thank you, Jane. Landon?
Sure. I think that a couple of things are going on. Industrial is going to emerge from the pandemic just fine. I think, if anything, it has accelerated the move from thinking back a decade or so ago, where there was a large move frankly, across the globe in the supply chain of having just-in-time inventory, that parts and products would show up just when they're needed. And that has certainly created a real problem in this supply chain constrained environment. Now it's more of a focus on just-in-case inventory. And I think corporations trying to pare their balance sheets down by carrying less inventory have been burned by that, and realize now that perhaps some safety level of inventory is appropriate. So I think that will help the overall industrial market coming out of this. The other things going on in industrial, we're probably going to go on anyway, that there is a move away from the large sort of 2 million square foot plus mega regional distribution centers to more localized centers that are closer to the population or closer to their customers, even if they're not retail customers. That was going on anyway. I think that's going to accelerate. Office, interestingly, 5 or 6, maybe even 10 years ago, people were predicting the death of the suburban office park. And now the market seems to want that. One, there's often not structured parking, so you're outdoors. You can take stairs because you're, in many cases, talking about a 5 to 7, 10-story building, and people want to avoid elevators. They're not comfortable in an urban environment right now. So we're seeing a renewed interest in suburban locations. They're going to have to change a little bit, but the real question is what's going to happen to the urban locations, and what is it going to take for people to get comfortable going back into an urban environment. Retail is, gosh, anyone's guess. We do think that 10 years from now, no one will use the phrase shopping center. Well, people will look at you, what is that? Because the combination has to be an activity that people find attractive and a use that's a physical use. They need to be there. Think nail salon or hair salon or eating at a restaurant, things that you can't do virtually. So it's going to be some combination of that.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask my last question, which is, how have you all adapted to the pandemic, either through your interaction with your tenants, your clients, or your lenders? Jane, you may want to start first.
Sure, yeah. I would say that we learned to be more proactively working with our tenant to work together through this hard time. Just like Peter and all shared, we proactively contact our tenant and to find a plan we can work together to overcome this challenge, to be compassionate, but also loyal to our investors' interest. We are also learning how to increase our efficiencies with less resource, especially in the hotel sectors, and also managing the balance, has a strong balance sheet is a key to weathering all of those challenges right now.
Thank you, Jane. Peter?
Yeah, so from a big picture perspective, we're investors and we invest in best-in-class operators. And so One, from just a strategic standpoint, we're paying attention to our operators much more closely and assessing how they're behaving in this pandemic. Are they very reactive? Are they empathetic to tenants, which we think is important? Are they bringing in changes and innovation? And then are they comparing themselves, to the sort of top 10% or 20% of their competitive set marketplace, right? Because, it's hard to say, for example, multifamily, we own 12 or 15 projects, mostly in the Southeast. Every different market is different and affected differently. So, how are they performing compared to their direct competitors, right? Now, on a project level, we are being very empathetic to our tenants, waiving fees, working with them on payment plans, exchanging, being accommodative in the short term, having them extend their leases to longer term, using this opportunity to not being accommodative to tenants that aren't good tenants. Let's get them out and let's now improve our tenants with better credit, right? And so we're being very proactive in all those areas of project management.
Thank you, Peter. Landon?
I think we probably in some ways adapted like everyone else. When I read this question, I thought back probably a year ago, we started thinking about where my office is located. We're going to be in the hard perimeter of the RNC and thinking, how are we going to operate? You can't get in and out of the building. We're not able to work remotely, or we're going to have to set up office space in one of our suburban office buildings. And of course, like everyone else, we learned very quickly that we can work from home and operate remotely. But as Jane pointed out earlier, you cannot facilitate culture working virtually and remotely. So we're trying to figure out how we address that in the interim, particularly when things pick up and we start hiring more. I think it's particularly critical when bringing new people on to be able to expose them to our culture, and we need to be able to do that in person. From a real estate operating, I think that it's probably had the biggest impact on our office business, having to make sure the cleaning is up to par, what people expect, creating physical distance limitations. Certainly vertical transportation in an urban environment, elevators are a huge issue. And we're not quite sure how we're going to adapt as things come back, because no one wants to get on an elevator with someone else. And right now you don't have to worry about it. Right now you don't have to worry about sharing an elevator lobby, much less an elevator. But I think we will get to the point where we're going to have to figure out how to adapt to that. And I think on the retail front, we are focused on how to create activity that draws people. Again, that was a trend going on anyway, but that is the only way to get people to a retail environment right now, is to create an activity that is attractive, that can still be safe. Because we have, on the one hand, retailers who've gone out of business and aren't coming back. The other hand, you have retailers like Target who've kind of figured it out. You can go online and find out what product you want is in what specific Target store, order it, and go to the front service desk and pick it up. So it's sort of like Amazon without the delivery. It's just Amazon pickup. So I think we'll find out a lot about how things operate in the coming year, but that's what we see right now.
Thank you very much. So now I want to take some time to ask questions that have been submitted to us from our audience. So for the audience, please continue to submit your questions for the panelists through chat. So I'll start with the first question, and I think the first question will be for you, Landon, again. So I think you already alluded to this a little bit. Given the struggle of retail and the aforementioned acceleration of the Amazon effect, what is the outlook for existing retail space that is vacant or soon to be vacant? Do you believe the majority of it can be effectively redeveloped, or is the demand for large retail space temporarily suppressed or rather than permanently eliminated?
I think the answer is yes, it's both of those things. I think we're going to see a real depression in rents. We think it's going to be at least 25%, given the amount of vacant space that's coming online. Tenants will form to backfill. I mean, the entrepreneurial drive of people of this country is great, and I think small businesses will form and they will occupy those spaces that make sense. Interestingly, the retail that we own that prior to this pandemic, we probably would have put in the lowest category of what we own, the small neighborhood grocery anchored centers with a few small shops that were not very sexy, not very exciting. And those are frankly the only thing that's holding up right now. And those are holding up well. So I think to the extent you have small spaces, they'll re-tenant. Rents won't be the same. The businesses may be a little different, but they will re-tenant over time. The bigger challenge is going to be some of these big centers, which is one reason we've always been a little bit concerned about retail. We have been a net seller of our development pipeline on retail for a long time, simply because even prior to a pandemic, when retail goes bad, there's not much you can do about it. It's generally an anchor has gone dark and there's not another anchor waiting in the wings, or worse yet, the environment around that retail center has changed such that it's no longer a viable retail center. I mean, witness, for those of you who've been in Charlotte long enough, Eastland Mall. There was no saving Eastland Mall under any scenario, and that's a concern for some of the larger retail projects. So I would wonder about some of the other larger projects in our market and what's going to happen to them over time.
Thank you. So I'll pick another ask the second question. So the question is, would another COVID lockdown or even the current situation would encourage people move from large cities like New York to cheap cities like Charlotte in the commercial real estate world? Any one of you may want to answer this question.
You know, we invest in about 20 states across the country, and we're seeing a big move from the more dense areas to the more suburban areas, even rural areas. I think the whole movement from, let's say, New York or the high tax, state tax states to places like Charlotte or the Southeast already started before the pandemic, right? That shift was already happening. Now we're seeing it just increasing, that pace increasing, number one. Number two, within those areas, we're seeing, again, people moving from high density urban areas to suburban areas with services. And so when they do make a move, they're not going from urban to urban, they're going from urban to suburban.
Thank you. Jane, you have anything to add?
Sure, yeah. So I'll say that, like we mentioned earlier, it's not just individual, it's corporate as well. As we mentioned on the office market, we see the net absorptions, the net absorptions in California, New York, Texas, while Southeast, including Charlotte, are still seeing positive net absorptions in office space. That meaning job growth, and also meaning people are still moving into those areas. This is pre-COVID, and the pandemic didn't really it's really just accelerated as a trend. And so in Charlotte, we see U-Haul with New York plates coming into Charlotte a lot recently. And I think from office market, Charlotte ranked number 3 among the nationally. And also from multifamily standpoint, I see, well, we do see very steady rent. I mean, it's not growth, rent growth is not as strong, but we do see very steady occupancy rate. And for our own assets, we do see occupancy actually increase in the Q3, and there are a lot of people are moving from New York and other metro area. So we do think Charlotte is positioned very well, and when things returns to normal, I expect that Charlotte will benefit from it.
Thank you very much. Landon, do you see similar trend in the industrial sector?
That's a good question. I was probably prepared more to answer it on the office sector than the industrial, because I think they function a little differently. So let me answer it first for office, and then maybe I'll work my way into industrial. I think a generation ago, people would come out of school, they'd find a job, and they'd go to where that job was, whether it's Charlotte or New York City or Chicago. And really over the last generation, particularly over the last 10 years, that model has turned on its head, that most people coming out of school today pick a city, quality of life, friends, whatever it is, they move to that city and they find a job in that city in their chosen field. That has turned the corporate relocation model on its head, and now companies want to move where the people are moving. So I think Charlotte will benefit greatly by that dynamic. As far as industrial goes, because of the physical nature, it's not as labor is important. It's really becoming increasingly important. Frankly, a lot more industrial operations are far more labor intensive than they used to be. Witness an Amazon center, which in some ways is a big warehouse, and in other ways employs thousands of people in the same building. By their nature, they have to follow population eventually, because they're either distributing, servicing, manufacturing a physical product that's going to end up in a physical location. And so I think over the long haul, that will industrial businesses will tend to move where the population is, and move away from where the population is not. And one of my friends' kids in New York says, what's the point in being in a city if you can't use the city? Otherwise, you're stuck in a 500 square foot apartment and you can't use all the things this city has to offer. Why do I want to be here? And I think until things open up, that's going to continue to be the case, obviously, in addition to the tax issues.
Thank you very much. The next question is, how bad will it get in 2021, or are we going to be over or already out of the pandemic in 2021? And what is the reality will be on either retail, hotel, or recreation? Or is there a silver lining there that you might anticipate? And anybody may want to jump in.
I could start off there. So I don't think the pandemic's going to go away. Period. It's going to hopefully, get reduced or controlled. But we also have to think about what's next. And I think it'd be silly for us to think that this is a once in a lifetime situation, and once it goes away, we're not going to face anything like this again. We have to be prepared for another pandemic, for this one to either come back or a sort of different one come back, and focused on health and the way people behave and the desires of people and tenants, right? And so this is going to force, permanent changes in the industry, which I really think are all good. I mean, it really forces us to think through, how could we provide, better, more enjoyable, safer environments, whether it's office, retail, hospitality, multifamily, across the board. And so, no, this isn't going away, but it's going to improve because we're all going to get better at what we do and hopefully much better prepared for whatever else comes up in the future.
Thank you, Peter. Jane, you want to add?
Sure, yeah. So as Peter said, I don't think a pandemic is going to completely go away. And even if it does, there might be another one coming. I think how we deal with pandemic is very important. And in 2020, the method we are dealing with pandemic by using the method lockdown, which had the huge impact on the economy. And I hope we're all learning how to handle pandemic in a better way. And so either it's like, be from the government's point of view, they will be having more PPE or protocols in place to how to handle things. And then as individual corporations, how do we implement those health protocols, but while still keep the economy going? Those are very important. So hopefully there will be trusted, widely distributed vaccine in the first quarter 2021. But even if there is not, we will have to come up a plan to how to deal with it. And the economy just we cannot survive in this, totally locked down environment for too long. So we need to have a better strategy to how to handling the pandemic. So I hope the 2021 will be a dust settling year for all of us to commercial real estate. I hope it's for all sectors. Actually, for multifamily, I think we already see some strong bounce back. And then for office, assume, people learn how to handle it and the school can return normal and people can go back to work. And then 2021 could be a dusty settling year, and some of those unexpected fallouts are sure to happen, but mid-year and beyond, I hope we will see new announcements and health and remember the crisis events just accelerate trends already in motion. So certainly we will return and allow Charlotte for start what could be a multi-year run. And that could be just a reward as managing 2020. And also for the hotel sector, it's really right now, I know it's sad to see what's going on, but we've already seen like China, their hotel sector has already been bounced back like tremendously just in October. Hopefully, when we started to handle pandemic in a much better way, we will see hotel business being coming back as well.
Thank you very much. Landon, what's your prediction for 2021?
Okay. Well, let me phrase my answer a little differently than you asked the question. Real estate is really a long-term business, particularly ownership and operating of real estate. And we feel really good when we look at sort of 7 to 10 year plus horizons about when the markets we're in, particularly Charlotte, and the products that we have developed and owned. But having said that, in any horizon like that, you're going to have some downturns, and 2021 is a little bit difficult to guess what's going to happen. I agree with Peter and Jane that pandemic's not going away. If there's a vaccine in the first quarter, it may be third quarter before it's widely distributed. So I think we're going to have to learn to live with what we are doing now. We'll get better at it. Hopefully our mechanisms, our societal mechanisms of dealing with it will be a little less blunt force and probably more targeted. But I do think we're going to have to live with it. So 2021 is a challenging year to figure out what's going to happen. Is it going to be worse than 2020? I don't think so. I think it will be better. Is it going to be a lot better? That's very difficult to say. But I do think over the long run that we are in a very good market in Charlotte, certainly in the Southeast in general. If you look over the next decade, which I think is an appropriate time frame to think about commercial real estate, I think things are going to be not just good, but great. I mean, I really do. We really think the next decade's going to be far superior than the last decade, which has been pretty darn good.
Thank you very much, Landon. That's perfect to give us a very optimistic kind of prediction there. So I want to thank all of you for taking part in this very important conversation. So thank you very much. And Ding Choi, I'll hand it to you. Please close us out today.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Chu. And a big thank you to our panelists, Peter Fioretti with Mountain Funding, Jane Wu with Panorama Holdings, and Landon Wyatt with Childress Klein. I saw in the chat a number of questions on housing. So I will share that we have on October 29th, Dr. Chu will be hosting the 2020 State of Housing in Charlotte Summit. So in that summit, they'll report on the current state of housing. So that includes both rental housing and owner-occupied housing in Charlotte. And we would love to have all of you attend. I'd also invite you again to our Dean's Leadership Series in November. So our next session is on November 16th. We will be looking at family business. So thinking about COVID-19 and what makes family businesses different in terms of what's going on with them in this pandemic. So you can learn about this and more about our 50th anniversary events online at belkcollege.uncc.edu/50. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay safe.